everybody. This is Dr. Dadu presenting hierarchical clustering in R. Happy listening. Introduction. Here I've assumed that you don't even have any knowledge about clustering. You just know that there's a tool in data mining known as clustering. Now, I've also assumed that you don't need too much knowledge of R. That you don't have too much knowledge of R. All I want you to do is to check whether cluster, a package that ought to be in base R, is in there. To check if it's there, and it doesn't matter the version of R we are running. That's all that's required. The synopsis for this video will be cluster analysis, hierarchical clustering in particular, and within that, agglomerative nesting, upon which the function Agnes was written. How do we construct trig structure? How does R construct dendrogram? These three materials are very useful. Cluster.pdf, you can just Google that to get that information. There's a book written by this gentleman, Data Mining Concept, Model, and Methods. It's also useful. There's a popular book by Kaufman and Russo, Panic Groups in Data. Very, very useful for the course, for the video. So, cluster analysis. When you study data, you are looking at samples within the data, cases, objects. You want to see whether they share some similarities with each other. Whether these similarities you can notice are enough, plentiful enough for you to match them up to be in a cluster. If that's the case, you're going to have clusters in the data. As a human being, you can handle it when the number of dimensions is below 3. When it is 4 or above, you'll have to go to programming. Now, you want to talk about hierarchical clustering. Here, I intend to demonstrate how it is done manually. I'll pick a 2-dimensional data and illustrate how it is done manually. After which I intend to now go to programming. But clustering is written over distant metrics. 2 techniques are highlighted here, Euclidean and Manhattan. You are sure that your data entries, the vector you have of samples is of real numbers as against non-zero integers. You probably will be using Euclidean. But if you have non-zero integers, you may want to use Manhattan. These are vectors of samples. Yes. Now, if I have a data of 2 dimensions, specifically content of table 1 to begin with, and I intend to use Euclidean, then this is how I will calculate my distance metrics. I gave the synopsis, the syntax, the formula for doing so in the immediate past slide. So this is how it's done. And the distance between samples 1 and 2 is calculated to be 4.0. If I do that for all the objects in here, I'll have a symmetric matrix that will be very, very similar to your correlation matrix, because the diagonal entries will always be 0. And this is distance from 1 to 2 or 2 to 1 if you like. Either way it is 4.0. Now, most times you don't want your samples to be numbered. They want them symbolized. Why? Because numbering them could mess up, could confound with the metric function, metric numbers. So you symbolize them. And if you do so, you probably will have something like this to bargain with. Now, if you have the data and you're trying to see whether there are clusters, you probably want to sketch. You do your manual plotting to obtain something like this. Now, in our distance matrix, you will notice that besides the diagonal entries, the distance value that is least is 2.0. That tells me that objects A and B can belong to a cluster. And as you do so, you are going to arrive at a situation like this. A and B is put on a cluster. Step 0 in our algorithm tells us that whenever we are able to find two objects in the cluster, all other objects will remain aloof. So if we repeat the algorithm, we'll arrive at this. But I have to say something. I've talked about calculating the distance function for calculating the distance between objects. What about between clusters? Because that is required for here. This is the formula for calculating distance metrics between clusters. And I've actually applied it here to calculate the distance between this cluster and that cluster to get these values, which are displayed in this dissimilarity matrix. Again, you can see that besides 0, 3 is the smallest number, and it's within the cluster D and E, meaning that D and E can form a cluster. As it does so, you're going to have this situation. We saw A and B belong to a single. Now we are seeing that D and E are in the cluster. We repeat the algorithm and we'll arrive here. Now all that we have done can be summarized like this. In step 0, the objects are aloof of each other. In step 1, A and B form a cluster. In step 2, D and E form the cluster. Step 3, C, valid 4.5 upon 5. C joins the cluster D. And finally here, the two clusters join each other. That's step 4. This is doing it manually. But like I said, the dimension is just 2. A human being can still work with even dimension 3. But when it's dimension 4 above, it's helpless. He has to come to computation. But before we go to what R has for us, this is a better summary to what we had in the previous slide, because it attaches to each step the matrix, the distance matrix, but responsible for the formation of the clusters. And note that these numbers here is monotonic. You will find that that's usually the case. at least with a hierarchical clustering. Now, what's the provision of R towards this? Well, it's description of Agnes, which is the function written in R, to do agglomerative nesting. That's the description, usage, and this is the syntax. Well, you want more that information on the data, just say data. The data we want to use is vote.repub. Vote.repub. You want more information, just give that to her. It will give you more information on that. And this is the code. Invoke the library. If you don't invoke the library, it may work, but it's for readability and for your own sake. Later, when you keep the code somewhere, you may forget what it's doing. But when you see the invoked library, you quickly understand to assist you to remember. Okay, so invoke the library, and tell her that you are using this data. You want to have a glimpse of data, give this command. It will give you some part of the data for you to observe. Now, this is Agnes, the function that does the agglomerative nesting. And it puts the result in AGN1. If you want to see the result, just invoke AGN1. And you want it to be plotted, which is the ultimate here. Say plot. When you ask it to plot, it will actually come up with two outputs. One would be for the similarity matrix entries at the base there. Then the second will be the dendrogram. This is the similarity matrix. These are, you see the values here, like I said, are monotone. Okay, then that's the dendrogram. Imagine if you had to do this by hand. This fully, when will you finish? Besides, the dimension is too high for a human capability to handle. This is the farthest I intend to go on hierarchical clustering and R. Watch out for my next video on another area of statistics. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Thank you so much.